I get to work with my wife every single day. My kids get to come to work with me. We get to take them out to some of these beautiful, amazing properties that you'd never know about. They're tucked away 45 minutes off the nearest highway, way back in the mountains. It's a homestead from the 1860s, and I get to kick it with my family and pick apples. And every hard decision and every hard moment is shared with my family, and that's can be stressful, but it's also just like we built this. My wife and I built this. That's it. That's the whole story.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Tales, Ales, and Trails. This week on the podcast, we've got Brendan Barnard of Posterity Ciderworks. We sit down with Brendan in their new Arnold location to talk about the origins of Posterity Ciderworks, to talk about the philosophy and the process behind the cider they make, to talk about what it means to them to be a part of this community and to be kind of rooted in the community in so many ways. It's a really, really great discussion. You're not going to want to miss it. If you're not following us already on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram, on X, we're on all the platforms putting out new content every single day. Without further ado, please enjoy this episode with Brendan Barnard of Posterity Ciderworks. Cheers. Well, Brendan, thanks so much for having me, especially during these, let's call it, uncertain times weather-wise. I mean, you guys were in a state of emergency here in Arnold a couple of days ago.
It was a little gnarly, yeah.
Yeah, but I appreciate you making time for us to come down and talk to you. We've been excited about this. We've been
Happy to have
talking to you
yeah.
guys for a few months now and trying to make this happen. So I'm glad we could do it.
Awesome. Yeah, it's good to have you. It's nice to have power back.
Yeah.
And, but we still got kind of the ambiance, the vibes of all that nice giant piles of snow.
But, I was talking to somebody, as I was coming through town on Saturday morning. I was like, you guys are used to snow, right? And they're like, yeah, but like a foot of snow, not like whatever this is. Yeah.
It was a lot. Yeah. One of my employees just up the road, like not even that far away, she said they got about 48 inches in just under 3 days.
That is unreal.
Yeah. It was, and then the hard part for everybody was really that it was paired with wind.
Yeah.
So it was like a lot of snow at once and then 20, 30, 40 mile an hour winds. And that's what caused all, just wrecked it.
Yeah, man. Everyone I've talked to, though, like, good spirits, even throughout all this. I mean, you guys were open without power this past weekend, like making it work. Like,
Bottles and snow drifts. And yeah, we made it work.
I love it. There's so much I want to talk to you today about Posterity and how this all came to be. I know you guys are coming up on 4 years now, which is huge. I want to start first, though, talking about you, talking about your background, and obviously Chris's background as well. Where are you from? How did you guys meet? Kind of take me through your guys' story a little bit.
Absolutely. So I grew up in the South Bay, just outside San Jose. My wife is from Santa Cruz. Um, yeah. Lot of odd jobs along the way. I very briefly wanted to study like brewing science up at Davis, but originally I started out studying materials science at UC Santa Cruz. I dropped out when my mom got cancer. I never went back, but I've studied a bunch of different random things, and somehow, way down the road, I find myself putting all of these little pieces of a lot of the different things that I've been passionate about over the years, put them all together, and this is where we are. So we met online, and so we had a couple apartments together, and then our first house was in Half Moon Bay, just north of Half Moon Bay, the little town of El Granada.
Yeah.
So we found this adorable little 1930s beach bungalow that hadn't been renovated in quite some time, so it was actually affordable. But the huge selling point of the house was the garden in the back. It was just like this secret garden, this little tiny old, almost like a farmhouse kind of vibes, like a little bit of a bungalow crossed with a farmhouse. And then in the backyard, there was just this giant garden. The woman who owned the property was a master gardener. And she'd been there, I think, for 40 years.
Wow.
And so the backyard was just full of bulbs and all sorts of wildflowers and a ton of trees. And they were mostly fruit trees. And so there was like two almost 30-foot tall pineapple guavas, which we hadn't even seen before. And we're like, what is this? And then it was like 8 apple trees, I think, and 3 or 4 pear trees, and some lemons, and some peaches, and a lime tree, and like, this is amazing.
Right.
This is beautiful. Um, and so we jumped on it. We had to have it because it was just so beautiful. And then we started getting fruit off of all of those fruit trees.
Yeah.
And we very quickly realized that we had no idea what we were doing with that much fruit. It was like a sizable quantity. Like, you go down to like some of the U-Pick farms or whatever, and you'll get like a bushel,
Sure.
and make a bunch of pies and make some sauce and share it with friends. And this
Right.
was like 8 times that much. It was like 200, 300, 400 pounds of apples, depending on the year, and the pears as well. And we had no idea what we were doing. Like at the beginning, we were even just like struggling to identify the varieties.
Yeah.
She was growing like a lot of cool heirloom fruit. The first like breakthrough that we had, and kind of like I think the gateway in a lot of ways, was one of the varieties is called the Arkansas Black. And it's this deep purple, almost black apple, which made it fairly easy to identify because there's almost no apples that look like that. And that was kind of like opening the door of like, oh, okay, there's some real cool variety here.
Yeah.
What do we do with all of this? And so the first year we tried everything like in our kitchen. So we were like making pies and making applesauce and like freezing juice and making dried apple rings and candying pears. And we barely made a dent. It was like, I don't know, we still had probably 200 or 300 pounds. And we're like, what? How do you do this? And so we realized that the answer was the classic answer is fermentation. When you have too much fruit, that's what you do with it. So I had basically no knowledge of hard cider. I'd had a couple of hard ciders over the years. I'd had a couple of like the dry English style. And then I'd had a couple of the American style ciders. And those were like basically my only 2 reference points. So we just kind of dove in. And the first batch we made was with some friends who were brewers. And we'd homebrewed beer with them before, and they were like, yeah, let's tackle a cider. Let's do this. Let's find out what happens. And those first batches were awful. They were terrible. Just we had no idea what we were doing. Right. Well, and so that was kind of the germ of it, was just being really dissatisfied with what we were making with all of this beautiful, free, heirloom, high quality fruit. And we're like, how do we make something that feels special? Because this fruit is special. And so that's when I got real nerdy about it, and just started going really deep dives, trying to find old techniques, historical techniques. I started reading more about like winemaking, because like most of the hard cider that people come across out in the world, standard bar and liquor store style hard cider is really more like hard soda. Like the simple fact is it's bulk industrial juice concentrate,
Right.
fermented as quickly as possible, sterile filtered, pasteurized, flavor stabilized, and then artificial or natural flavor extracts wind up added in.
Right.
It's hard soda. Apple happens to be involved. And so we weren't doing that, both because that's very labor intensive. It's super hard to pull off in like a home garage, which is where we were starting. But also just like we had these beautiful like Arkansas Black. It's a flavor like you've never had in an apple if you're used to the standard grocery store varieties. And like, how do you get that in a bottle? And how do you get that in a bottle if nobody is teaching you? And it's just like there's no real curriculum available for old school styled or modern hybrid styled hard cider. It's really coming out of the industry having vanished for a really long time. And when it came back, it was mostly influenced by kind of the mass market alcohol science. So brewers turned their hand to it, and the large companies were looking for stuff that was shelf stable, super predictable. Because the game with brewing a lot of the time is very different from winemaking. Where in winemaking, you're allowed to have annual variations. There's like, yeah, this year there was less rainfall.
Yeah.
That's going to change the character.
Yeah.
In brewing, you want to nail it every single time. You want a recipe. And so what we found is like the first couple batches, we were trying to do that, and it's just incredibly hard. And the reason it's super hard is because you're dealing with a more variable product.
Right.
The fruit is gonna change.
Yeah.
You have a hot summer, that's gonna do stuff to the aromatics. It's gonna change the sugar levels. Your pH is gonna be different, and you can't necessarily nail it every time.
Yeah.
If at least you want to do stuff that's speaking for itself. If you want to make the kind of stuff that's been boiled, pasteurized, stabilized, filtered, acid corrected, all of that, you can do that. But what we really wanted to do was something that was a little bit more honest to the fruit that we were working with. And so we just I did my weird deep dives. I started looking at like winemaking techniques and like, okay, I feel like there's some similarities here. How would I adapt it? And then there was also just some total blue sky. Like, if no one told me how to do this, first principles chemistry, like how would I get to what I think I want if there was no advice at all in the entire world?
Yeah.
And so we just started tinkering and playing, and about 3 years in, we started making the stuff that was actually, it was good. The first batches, like my wife would barely even let me share them with friends. And she was like, no, you can't serve that for game night. That's not a thing. And that was fair. She definitely kept me honest about the quality that you were making early on. But a couple of years in, we started to get a handle on a little bit of what we were doing, and we started making some batches that we were actually happy with and sharing them. And kind of at the same time that was happening, we were starting to burn out on Bay Area life.
Sure.
Like we both had kind of tech jobs. And we were doing like this backyard farming thing. Yeah. So we had 3 chickens, and then we had like 6 chickens, and then we had like 8 chickens, and it was a very small backyard. So we're like pretty much pushing the limits. The garage was full of cider making supplies. We had all these fruit trees. We got a beehive. And it was a really small yard. So it was full. And we were like, I think we need more space.
Right.
Like, I think we want to have kids. We've got 2 and then 3 dogs.
Yeah.
This place is full. Like, our house was like 800 square feet. And so we started thinking about buying some property. And so that kind of brought us to the Sierra foothills. So we bought our place up here in 2017. And I think it was either that year or the year after that we made a batch that we shared with one of our friends who grew up in Brittany, northern France, which is a classic cider production region. And we brought a bottle over, and she was tasting it, and she was like, this is as good, maybe better than some of the stuff I grew up on.
Wow.
And the French are very proud of their food culture.
Of course.
That is hard-won praise.
Yeah.
And we're like, that's kind of cool. There might be something to this. And so we're like, maybe we plant an orchard up where we've got this farm that we're kind of like going up on the weekends, basically. So we'd drive up Friday night, we'd work on the house, and like we pulled out a bunch of rotten fencing, just like work all weekend outside with your hands on something super tangible, and then go back down into kind of the tech work week, Sunday night or Monday morning.
Right.
And so we had this like little journal of an idea, like that might be fun to scale up at some point. And then in 2019, our first son was born. And when he was 6 months old, I got laid off from my job. The lab that I was working in shut down. Our whole team got laid off. And then my wife, Chris, got laid off like 6 weeks later from a different company. And we were like, okay, this is real decision time.
Yeah.
We need to really figure out what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so we decided to just jump. So we got kicked in the butt and we sold our place in Half Moon Bay and we moved up. And that was fall of 2019, right before the pandemic. And so it actually kind of felt like maybe we caught that timing. We read the signals correctly. It was terrifying at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, down the road, we're like, okay, there's a direction here, right? Some momentum.
Right.
We just had to listen. So then we did a lot of work trying to figure out, like, okay, if we want to go for this, if we want to start a cider business, what do we have to do? Like, what does permitting look like? How do we, like, we had no idea. And so we spent about a year and a half trying to figure out, like, what makes sense. Can we use our barn? We got to expand the orchards. We don't have a mature orchard. Where do we get our fruits? And that was kind of the beginnings of what we do now, which is mostly harvesting at this point, formerly abandoned orchards. But before we started working with them, a lot of these properties hadn't been harvested or farmed actively in decades, multiple generations in some cases. We're talking like abandoned in the 40s.
Right.
And so we were looking at our little baby trees and we're like, okay, if we're making a cider business, we need fruit. These are supposed to be fruit, but that was for the other plan, which is where we like do this in 5 to 10 years. What do we do? And originally we were kind of looking for these old historic orchards in the area just for genetic material. So we wanted to find old orchards in the area that are growing varieties that were not available commercially. We could take cuttings and graft them into our orchard, and have some idea when we're looking at these properties of like what can survive in our climate. Because this can be a fairly aggressive summer climate. And so, our orchard where we are, we peaked a couple of years ago. We saw like 2 or 3 days at like the 114 to 117 degrees some day, which is a lot. And so a lot of apple production these days is done in much more temperate areas. So we're like, we can look at some of these historic orchards and see like little snapshot of what works. Still alive decades later. And that'll give us a leg up. And then we got out to some of these places and we're like, there's actually still lots of fruit here. It's not just genetic material. There's meaningful quantities of apples if we can figure out how to harvest and kind of reclaim these properties. So at this point now, we work with probably 2 or 3 dozen farms in the area, ranging from a couple of historic trees in the backyard on up to literally dozens of acres of trees that were planted at some point. And then the varieties that they were growing became commercially non-viable. The example that I always use is Honeycrisp was the trendy apple like 10 years ago. Now it's Cosmic Crisp. And these things kind of have their waves and they change. And, you plant your orchard in 1910 with trendy varieties for 1910. Now it's 1940. Nobody wants those anymore. What do you do? And so a lot of these properties were abandoned for that reason. There's some attrition when they're not receiving any care at all, like no insect management, no irrigation, no fertilizer, no pruning. Bears go into the orchards and knock branches down. And then we come in there decades later and we can kind of see like, okay, where are we at? And some of them are actually in great shape. Some of them, it's a process. It's a few years of working with the property owners. We buy the fruit, the money helps them with property taxes and maintenance. When it goes to maintenance, that means that we get more access. That means we're pulling more fruit the following year. They're getting more money. And it's kind of this slow multi-year bootstrap, hopefully back into being a meaningfully productive property. And so they're getting actual money for their fruit at that point. And then also just the pride of like, our family orchard is making something again. And a lot of people are super jazzed about that. It's been a really, really warm reception from a lot of the folks in the area. We're a little nervous in the early days. Like some of these properties are pretty far out and you're like knocking on doors, leaving notes on ranch gates and stuff like, hey, can I come check out your apple trees?
That's a little like, how's that going to go?
But no, it was super, super welcoming. Everybody's really excited for the most part. A lot of the time, some of these folks are old enough that they remember those last kind of productive harvests and then decades of emptiness. And they're so happy to see somebody pay attention to the trees again and help with that kind of property management, maintenance. And that produces the bear pressure. And that and also, if we're getting things mowed again and clearing out dead limbs and stuff, that's going to reduce wildfire pressure. And so it's a perfect synergy. It's awesome. And then we get access to some fruit that literally doesn't exist commercially. They're old varieties. You can't buy them tonnage wise. There's no market for it. And you got to just find it or grow it yourself. And we've been able to do that. So that kind of brought us to Mokelumne Hill, which was our first location. So we got that spot in 2021. So we moved up here in fall of 2019. Midsummer 21, we got the production permissions. So that was, I think, August. We were sweating it. We were worried about whether we'd miss another harvest, but we got it. So that was first production year. And that's also our first tasting room. We're now sitting in our second, almost 4 full years later, opening. So we opened in, I think spring of 2022, in Moke Hill. And we've been working with the folks up at Hinner House pretty regularly over the years, aging stuff in their barrels. Nate and Bonnie have been super, super fun to work with. They've got great barrels and great advice as well for kind of the production planning, permitting side of things. They were about a year ahead of us in the opening timeline. So when we would hear scary things from some government office, we could talk to them, and they were really nice. And we're like, okay, this is who you want to talk to. This is not as scary as it sounds, that kind of thing. And so they've been telling us the whole time, basically, like, Arnold's a cool town. They're going to like what you're doing here. You should have a spot up here. And so, now 4 years later, we're, this is week 4 going into, I think. And it's been awesome.
It's a really, really fascinating journey. And I read up on some of it, when I was preparing for this. It also sounds like a ton of work that you guys have put into this. I mean,
it's a lot. Yeah, it's definitely a lot. We're a super small team. It's basically my wife and I, and then we've got a couple of folks that we've been working with for a few years now, that help with production days, bottling days, stuff like that. But yeah, everybody wears a lot of hats. We've got some folks who will do farmers markets for us, down in the Bay on like a Sunday. And then Monday morning, we're out with them picking fruit in one of these orchards up in the mountains. I'm driving everywhere down to the city for kind of wholesale calls. I do farmers markets too. We're in here pottering. Harvest season was crazy this year. It was our biggest production year. And it was all hands on deck. We were doing 7 days a week. I was joking at one point that it was like a pretty, regular 8 to 9 day work week. And just, it was a lot, but we got a lot of great fruit. It was a good production year. And last year was a little bit lower. We got some late frosts. And one of the interesting things about working with these properties, the fun part is that there are those annual swings in character. The stressful part is that there are also annual swings in productivity. So last year we had, year before last now. So 24, we had some super late frosts, and that killed 3/4 of the apple crop that was up here. We were still able to kind of paste together a harvest because we do work with so many properties throughout kind of Tuolumne, Calaveras, and Amador counties, various elevations, little microclimates. Some stuff is protected, but it was still a pretty rough year. And then last year, 25, is the opposite. It was a huge year. Everything landed right. Mild summer, a lot of fruit. So we were pretty tired.
Does that make things more exciting for you, that things can be variable year to year, or does it make it a little more nerve-wracking? Is it a little bit of both?
It's both. It's absolutely both. Kind of early on, we had that realization of just like, this is more like winemaking. There are swings. You can't control everything. You're gonna see variations. If you're letting it speak for itself, there are gonna be differences. And if you decide to say, okay, variability is acceptable, then Sometimes you can ride the stress. You're like, it's fine. It's just going to be different this year. But that is definitely still stressful. But I think for me, it's less stressful than trying to like rigidly lock it into the exact same thing every year
Yeah.
with those inherent variations. Like, we got a foot less rainfall one year. You want to make the exact same cider that year. That's more stressful to me than just saying, yeah, the 24 is different.
Right.
It is what it is. And so we have stuff that we'll do pretty regularly. We have some like single orchard blends whenever there's a crop on the property. We'll do an orchard blend, all the varieties that are cropping that year. I kind of do a walkthrough, taste all the different fruit, and kind of say, all right, we're going to do 10% of this row, 20% of that row, nothing from this row, 40% from the, and kind of paste together a blend. And those it'll be the same orchard, but it's going to be a different year and it's going to be different fruit, and that's okay. And then there's some stuff that's pretty predictable, where it's going to taste recognizable.
Sure.
And there's just might be a little drift in alcohol percentage, a little bit more rainfall, a little bit less. We'll see 7.4 to 8.1. And you're like, okay, that's fine. It's going to taste mostly the same, and that's just part of it.
Right.
And then there's one shots. Like, this is everything lined up in a certain way this single year. It's not going to happen again. We're just going to let that be its own bottle, and it's something special and ephemeral. And so, yeah, our solution to the variability was just to say, it's okay. Yeah. Winemakers stress about the details of a given year, but they're not necessarily trying to, at least the good ones, are not trying to like rigidly strangle the thing into being exactly the same.
Yeah.
They say, yeah, the 24s needs a little bit more time in barrel. It's okay.
I was going to ask you about your philosophy when it comes to cider making. I feel like I've already learned so much about your philosophy. I mean, even before we started recording, you were telling me about this dry hopped mead that we're drinking. And just to hear you talk about it here, the wealth of knowledge that you have about this process and the passion that you have for this process. So I feel like it would be disingenuous to ask you about your philosophy, but I do want to hear it in your own words, what you think your philosophy is behind your craft.
Absolutely. So in a lot of ways, my goal is to monkey with it as little as possible in a lot of ways. Ideally, we want to let the fruit speak for itself. So part of that philosophy means we never add sulfite. So sulfite is used both as a chemical pasteurizer and as an oxygen scrubber. It's there to control your microbial populations. We use wild yeast and native and cultivated strains. So depending on the orchard, it's going to be a native strain. It's going to be like this was wild fermented mead, and hopefully, and this is experimental. Like sometimes we'll say like, yeah, that orchard, I don't think we'll do the wild yeast this year. I don't have good feelings about it. And then other times we're like, yeah, it's going to be great. We'll do it. But in general, we're never using sulfite. We don't use any kind of clarifiers. We never filter. We don't do any like sterilization. There's no sterile filter pass, and we try not to back sweeten. We're not adding a ton of sugar to make it taste a certain way. We're not using artificial flavors. Where it is flavored, this is wild hops. It's something that we can actually put our hands on the whole ingredient. We've got like an elderberry rosé. That's local apples and native California elderberries from Tuolumne County that we're picking, and it's all whole ingredients that we are laying our hands on. We use barrels from our local distiller, who's often using local wine casks. And the goal is just to have something that I think is as honest as possible. Like, you're talking to the person who made it. I know the people who grew the stuff. It's a super, super short supply chain. And I think we can make something that's special because of that. Whether it's the stuff that is more reliable or the one-offs where it's like, yeah, this was this was something cool that caught my eye this year that happened to be possible because of all of the dozens of environmental factors that lined up in a certain way. And you can talk to me and I'll tell you what happened that year and why you're not going to see it again and what makes it special.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just a lot more fun. Like I said, there's a lot of effort and engineering and craft that goes into making the same thing year after year after year. I've got ADHD that would bore the heck out of me. I like doing different stuff. I like checking out the different properties. I like working with local property owners to kind of rehabilitate these beautiful historic trees. We can kind of grow stuff, zero input. Like we're not telling people like, okay, this is our orchard now. You need to start spraying. We need to like start irrigating these things, pump out your aquifers. Let's drench this place with herbicide. We're like, no, we're going to do this. Just they are what they are. They've reached some form of balance with where they're growing. Nobody's touched them in 80 years.
Yeah.
Maybe we set up a little bit of irrigation on some of the special ones that might be towards the end of their life. Maybe we take cuttings and we can start to regrow the orchard. But in general, the goal is to kind of have a very regenerative philosophy for the property management, help people preserve these. In some cases, we got fruit that's 160, 170-year-old trees. Some of the oldest stuff that we pick is out in Tuolumne County right now, like 1861 or so.
Wow.
And that's a special thing.
Yeah.
To find a tree that's that old, that's happily cropping year after year after year. And hopefully the money that we're able to pay for the fruit helps keep those things around.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's some aspects of the philosophy.
Yeah, and I mean, I think another huge part of it is it's and you talked about this already, but it's so rooted in supporting the community that's around you. I mean, that whole supply chain that you talked about and how small it is, it just feels like you guys, even from not necessarily being from here originally, have really set up shop, found some roots, and really dug into being a really great partner in this community. In addition to serving cider for folks that live here, but it feels like that's a pretty important, significant part of it for you guys.
It definitely is. And like I said, that's possible because people have been so welcoming.
Yeah.
Agriculture is a hard business. A lot of these older families that had these trees, they've moved on and they're doing some other form of agriculture that's just as hard.
Yeah.
And they're stoked to have somebody come along and say, that's valuable to me. I want to help you take care of that. Here we can pay for the fruit. Like that's going to help both of us get what we want out of the situation. And also it's just that the feather in the cap of like, this is our family's bottles.
Yeah.
Like we grew this.
Yeah.
Nobody's used it in 50 years and now it's special again. And yeah, people have been incredibly receptive to that. And that's been fun. So for this one, local small beekeeper, it's a pretty high Sierra honey. I think they were saying like 55, 6,000 feet.
Oh, wow.
And it's from this last harvest year, well water from our well and wild yeast and wild hops. And that's a great encapsulation, I think, of our philosophy. Like we want to have it close. And that gives us, in a lot of ways, a lot more control over the product, but also just a lot more variability and options. And stuff is going to change, and we can say that's cool.
Yeah, you touched on this a little bit already, but we're coming up on the 4-year anniversary, and in 4 years, I'm sure there's been a ton of challenges. I always like to scroll back as far as I can on when I'm getting ready to interview someone like you. I scrolled back as far as I could on your Instagram to find the original post for posterity. And I was like, man, it's really cool to see the beginnings.
Yeah.
And then go through it all and see how you guys have grown over the years. I mean, are there things that stick out to you about these first 4 years that are special, that have been challenging, that have really, shown you that, hey, this is something that is meaningful, that people are into, that has kind of helped you guys cement what this is and what has become for you? It's a big question.
Yeah. It's definitely been a refining process. I don't when we first started out, the the intention was a little bit more open, and just like, we're gonna try this. We're gonna see what happens. And then we've started to kind of refine our process and refine like the kind of relationships that we're looking for out in the community. And the philosophies developed as well. It is definitely crazy to think about how far we've come. We started off with, I think, 5 one-barrel steel fermenters, and that was it for first production year. Um, and we make a lot more than that now. We're still super tiny as these things go, but it's crazy to look back and be like, okay, so this last year we made just over 3,000 gallons. And that was huge. That was our biggest production year ever. And I don't think I would have anticipated how big we could actually get. And we're still finding like new ways to use the space. A lot of it that I think I personally have learned is just like the logistics balancing of it. Like there's so much thinking about like tank space and like, okay, this one needs 6 months, this one needs 2 months, that one needs a year. It should be in steel. Like we've got these oak barrels. Like when are they in our house up the road? When are they going to dump a barrel that I can use for this batch? And it's just that juggling. And it's super fun. It can be very stressful to try to balance that massive, constantly evolving load of demands. Um, but I mean, it's stereotypical, but like every challenge is an opportunity. Like we have a bad harvest this year. What do we do with that? Like we got to figure something out. And so like we've kind of we've learned a lot about how to manage the fruit. And so like this year is a huge year. I can kind of anticipate next year's going to be smaller.
Right.
So we worked really, really hard over harvest to get as much as possible, just in case. If next year is low, is there stuff that we can carry over?
Yeah.
And then it's, we'll release it at 2 years instead of at a year. And that will help plug a gap in the following vintage. So learning some of that has been cool. We've just continued to say yes to a lot of the opportunities. So like the building that we produce in was formerly a winery.
Yeah.
It came with about 24 grapevines out front, and that's free fruit too. Like,
Yeah.
can we play with those?
Yeah.
So we've been doing more wine grape co-ferments. Those this last year were pretty well received. So we just started talking to people coming in. It's a big wine growing area. Like, hey, anybody who's got some extra grapes? And so we got some new varieties this year from other properties. And people were like, absolutely. Like I have a home vineyard. And at this point, I've been making wine for 30 years at home. I don't need any more wine. Take it all. And that's been awesome. And so we just kind of wild hops, wine grapes, native elderberries. Like we're just like, okay, that's out there. How do we use that? And that's been cool. And I don't necessarily think that was part of the vision early on, was how much variety we would be able to make. But it's been a blast.
Yeah.
It's been really, really fun.
Yeah. Hearing you talk about it, it sounds like it's been fun, like truly, truly fun. I think it's easy in a space like this to kind of get lost in, I guess, the business of it, of trying to, you make sure you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's, but you sound like you're having a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love the production side. That's mostly where like I'm focused. Thankfully, Chris exists to handle all of the stuff that I literally could not. That gets us across the finish line and able to actually share it with people. And I'm not just some weird mad hermit making stuff in the garage. But yeah, there's definitely been stressful spots along the way. But my business partner is my wife, and that is a heck of a bond to have going into a stressful situation. And so I think that's allowed us to weather some stuff that a normal business would throw in the towel. So we're like, no, we're doing it. We're going to make it. And we have, and it's been awesome.
Is there something about the last 4 years for you, a memory, a moment, an experience that really kind of defines what Posterity has been all about?
When we first started, Chris asked me like, okay, we're about to open the doors. What's your dream goal here? Like what's your best case scenario for the business? Um, like what would you feel like we've made it? And I told her like I would love to get one of our ciders paired with a plate at a Michelin tier restaurant. I think that would be just the cherry on top of everything that we would be trying to do. And my wife is amazing and was like, okay, we're going to start working towards that today. That's not the stretch goal. That's the goal right now. Um, and so, um, we like first couple weekends, we were open. We were hearing people like in the tasting room because at that point, like I'd just been making stuff in a total vacuum. Like we were making it in the garage and sharing it with friends. Then we moved up here.
Yeah.
It was COVID. We weren't like hanging out with anybody. And so the first batches, like we were not sharing them with anybody. It was Chris and me, total vacuum. And so we were putting it out in front of people and they were saying some really interesting stuff like, wow, this is really special. Like, I want a bottle for our anniversary. Or like, I want a bottle for my daughter's wedding, or I want a bottle for my wife when she gives birth. And that's was more special than we'd really anticipated going in. Um, and so that's kind of that. And then this like dream goal of like, I want cider to be taken as seriously as wine just once,
Yeah.
and paired at a nice restaurant. And so we started looking at like fine dining, relatively near to us, not Michelin tier yet, just like a nice restaurant. Let's talk to them, see what they think of our stuff. So there's a chef down in Sacramento, at a restaurant called Localis, Chris Barnum Dan, and we saw some of his like Instagram posts and stuff like ingredients and kind of the philosophy he was talking about, and we're like, I think this guy would kind of like what we're doing. He might get it. He might have some good feedback. And so we reached out, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm always looking to try new stuff. Bring it down." And so we went down, and poured, I think, the whole lineup that we had at that point. I think it was like 4 bottles, which for us was huge.
Yeah.
Now, like in my case, I think I've got 9 or 10 different ciders just right now. But that was like everything. Pull out all the stops, bring all the good stuff. So we brought it down to him, and he was tasting it, and he was like, "These are really solid. Yeah, I want a case of each one. We're gonna put it on the menu, and we're gonna see what people think." We're like, "That's amazing," and like got out to the car like almost in tears because like this is a huge moment. It's one of our first like big wholesale sales, and it's like a nice restaurant. And he didn't have a Michelin star at that point. And then like 8 months later, he got his first star, and we'd been on the menu pretty much that entire time. And we're like, okay, well, that happened. Yeah, I guess maybe we are making some good stuff. Um, and the goal was like, not just to be tucked away on the menu, but actually like there's a glass in front of people paired with a plate, and get some feedback from people and see it taken seriously. And so then from there, we started talking to some other Michelin tier restaurants in San Francisco, and then kind of just worked our way through and knocked on doors. And like we're self-distributed, so there's no introductions. It's just like, hi, I have some stuff. You want to chat? Um, and so, like crazy people, we're like just knocking on the door, at like a 2 Michelin star restaurant. Like, hey, you don't know me. I'm just a guy. Can I have 5 minutes? And a decent number of folks said yes, and we made it onto a good number of menus. At this point, we've had our cider paired dozens and dozens of times across multiple years, different ciders for different restaurants, all the way 1, 2, and 3-star restaurants. Like literally some of the best restaurants in the world said like, this is good. Cider is serious. And that's awesome. That was like my dream goal going in. And now it's like, yeah, that's what we do. And I owe everything to my wife for making that happen. She's like, okay, we're gonna do this. I believe in you. And so that's been awesome. And that I think is kind of a good encapsulation of a series of moments that kind of just took me by surprise. Of like, if you go for it.
Yeah, yeah. It's really remarkable what's possible if you kinda set your mind to something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, love that. I wanted to maybe, uh, look ahead and talk about what's next for posterity.
Yeah.
We talked about that 4-year anniversary, but where do you wanna take things from here? We're sitting here in this brand new location,
Brandon.
uh, that's super exciting in and of itself. What's next for Posterity Ciderworks?
That's such a good question. The first 4 years is just it's so many there's a chocolate company in San Francisco called Dandelion,
Mm.
Chocolates, and I was reading an interview, and it's a husband and wife founder, um, they're huge, they're, like, gigantic, but they were talking, and it's, like, just this it's burned into my mind because it's so relatable, and they said, like, the benchmark for success for, like, a small business is the number and frequency of business-ending events that you manage to weather. Um, so, like, when you first start out, your business is about to end every single week, if not every day or 2. And then you get down to, like, there's a business ending calamity monthly, and, like, now it's quarterly, it's every 6 months, it's once a year, and I think that's just such a great, way to think about it. It's painful, it's true, like, living through that is so stressful, but I think it's absolutely true. So fewer of those would be cool,
Yeah.
but in general, like, the name of the business is Posterity for a reason. Um, what we work with are multi-generational orchards and properties. These were orchards that were planted more than a century ago in many cases with a very long-term mindset. And that is in a lot of ways what we're trying to replicate in our orchard. Our home orchard is for now, it's like my R&D lab.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of different varieties. It's a bunch of different root stocks. We can experiment, figure out like what lives in this climate. How can we get finicky varieties that like Brittany and Normandy and central England to live in a place that's way hotter
Yeah.
and way drier.
Yeah.
Um, but the goal in a lot of ways is for that to become another historic orchard. So we've made the choice to plant on slower growing rootstocks that have deeper roots and longer lifespans. Most modern fruit is coming from very small trees. Dwarfing cultivars is usually how they're referred to. And they're high density plantings, basically like a vineyard, but for apples. They're
Mm.
supported on trellis. They're optimized for high speed picking, surface irrigation, surface fertilizer, super churn and burn. And those trees will live 10 to 15 years, maybe 20. And what we've decided is okay, if we're not trying to get fruit by year 2, 3, cash positive by year 4, rip it all out and switch over to the next variety, year 10, 12. If we're trying to do one of these historic orchards, like we should plant slow trees. We're looking at crops 7 to 10 years in the
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah.
And these are trees that will hopefully, like the ones that we harvest right now, they'll live for another century plus.
Yeah.
Um, and that's again, that's part of the philosophy that goes into the bottles of low intervention, minimal additives in the orchard, in the bottle, working with a lot of the local properties, building those deep roots. I'm mildly obsessive about the history of a lot of really, really old businesses. So like there's a chart that I just look at sometimes, and it's the 1,000 businesses in the world that are 300 years old or more. Um, and I'm obsessed with it. I think it's so cool. And you look at like the history of some of the French wine houses and champagne houses and like the breweries in Belgium that are 700 years old, like the history of like chartreuse, all of these things. So many of those businesses are food and beverage. There's a huge, huge, huge number. It's the majority. It's like food, beverage, and hospitality
Yeah.
is 60% of that list.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's so much potential for building something with longevity like that when you're in this space, when you're working. It's harder in a lot of ways to work with the natural world. Um, but if you plug into it right, it'll sustain you for so long. It's amazing. I listen to like every podcast I can find that's an interview with like an Alsatian winemaker who's like generation 8. And it's like, my family's been in this exact same place for 450 years. And we're like, okay, we're 4 years in. Like we got a long road if that's the dream. But I think it's really cool to think about and try and um craft something from the ground up that has that potential. And you make the hard choices early on, and hopefully down the road it carries you. And I think that's yeah.
Yeah. I got to tell you, I asked that question a lot in these kinds of interviews, asking them, what's next? Where do you want to go from here? That's one of the more fascinating answers to that question I've had. I mean, just thinking about, what it could take to make this a uh, 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 generational journey for posterity. I mean, that's pretty special.
That's a dream.
I wanted to leave you with this, and I do want to say thank you. This has been fantastic. Anytime I can sit down with someone and have this kind of conversation about the passion behind the product, it's really really something. So thank you.
It's a
Um,
pleasure.
I want to ask you about maybe what's been the most rewarding part of this experience. It's been a ton of work. It's been a lot.
This one's super easy. I get to work with my wife every single day. My kids get to come to work with me. We get to take them out to some of these beautiful, amazing properties that you'd never know about. They're tucked away 45 minutes off the nearest highway, way back in the mountains. It's a homestead from the 1860s, and I get to kick it with my family and pick apples. And every hard decision and every hard moment is shared with my family, and that's can be stressful, but it's also just like we built this. My wife and I built this. That's it. That's the whole story.
No, that's can't say it better than that. I mean, that's you're kind of living the dream. A lot of people's dream, at least. I mean, man, Brendan, before I let you go, is there anything else you wanted to add? Anything that might be important to touch on? Anything like that?
Yeah. So our website is posterityciderworks.com. It's super easy. And then we're open here in Arnold now. Currently, our hours are Thursday through Sunday, 12 to 6. We would love to have you guys. We're happy to be here. Our Mokelumne Hill location is currently, well, we get some new staff members trained up. We're not open there, but my goal is that we'll be open there Sundays, like probably 1 to 5, something like that. Sundays for kind of Sacramento Sphere folks to do their club orders and pickups, and then also some of the local folks to stop in. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Sweet. Well, Brendan, thank you so much. This has been great. I'm glad the power's back on.
It's you.
And
We're not shivering.
all right. Well, cheers.
Cheers.